From 1745 until her death at the age of 42 in 1764, Madame de Pompadour was the mistress and confidant of the French king, Louis XV, and the most influential woman in France. Intelligent, well-educated, tactful and charming, but also tough and very capable, she was involved in political decisions, acted as an intermediary between the king and his ministers, and shaped state economic and social policy in France. Not least, she was a key figure in the world of the arts. Madame de Pompadour was not a highly cultivated aesthete with refined tastes, but knew what she liked, enjoyed and valued beautiful objects, and had a solid understanding of how the art world worked and why the arts mattered. Through her influence with the king, and through relatives and allies who held court positions, she exercised important patronage, particularly in painting, sculpture, architecture, and the decorative arts. For nearly 2 decades she played a central role in commissioning and collecting art, both for royal collections and for herself. At her death, the inventory of her possessions, which took a year to compile, consisted of over 30,000 individual objets d'art. Artists at the time were well aware of her importance and her potential for furthering their careers. The painter Carl van Loo painted this allegorical canvas, The Arts in Supplication, as Pompadour lay dying of tuberculosis in 1764. It shows the thread of her life about to be cut, with figures representing the arts gathered below, begging the fates to spare their benefactress. Madame de Pompadour favoured different styles in art, decoration, and architecture, but is strongly associated with the Rococo, and with one Rococo artist in particular, François Boucher. By the 1740s, François Boucher was a very successful and versatile artist, known for working across a wide range of genres, including history painting, portraiture, mythological subjects, landscapes, and genre scenes. His versatility and talent encouraged jealousy and praise among his contemporaries. The artist Pierre-Jean Mariette wrote of him that he was born a painter. One could say that he was born with a brush in his hand. Boucher's softly fluent and sensual style, mastery of colour, and skill at depicting the human and particularly the female form made him a leading figure of the Rococo. He was celebrated for his idyllic and romantic scenes in elaborate settings and lush, idealized landscapes, for his depictions of beautiful women and mythological figures, for the atmosphere of sensuality and indulgence he conjured up. Boucher's first works for Madame de Pompadour date from around 1750, and he painted his first portrait of her, for which this is a surviving study, at this time. He became one of her most favoured artists, with commissions for paintings, decorations, and designs for tapestries. Some of his most important work was carried out at the country house Madame de Pompadour acquired in 1750, Château de Bellevue. In 1749 the king bought land at Meudon, across the Seine from Paris on the road to Versailles, as the site for a small country house, but soon decided to present the place to Madame de Pompadour. This was at a time when their relationship was changing in nature, with physical intimacy giving way to platonic friendship and companionship, and this may have been the king's way of indicating that, while his relationship with his court favourite was becoming more distant in some ways, he wished to keep her close to him in others. From 1750 to 1751, Madame de Pompadour completed the buildings and gardens to her own tastes, creating a retreat of luxury and intimacy, which she called Château de Bellevue, because of the superb views it commanded over the valley of the Seine. In one of the most significant patronage exercises in the history of French Rococo art, and with François Boucher as her adviser, she commissioned furnishings and artworks to embellish it. Among those artworks were two paintings of Venus by Boucher, mounted as over-door panels in the main room of her bathing apartments. The paintings show the bath and the toilette of the goddess Venus. These paintings remained in Madame de Pompadour's possession after she left the Château de Bellevue, returning it to the king in 1757, and after many changes in ownership are now in two separate U.S. art galleries. The Bath of Venus is in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the Toilette of Venus, the subject of this film, is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The Toilette of Venus is a medium-sized picture. Unframed, it is just over a metre in height and a little under a metre wide. The Bath of Venus is almost precisely the same size. The two works were, of course, designed to fit in identically sized over-door panels. Of the two paintings, the Toilette of Venus is the better known, and is among the most celebrated examples of the art of the Rococo and the art of François Boucher. It is a sumptuous exercise in pinks and greens, blues and gold, in the depiction of smooth skin, rippling fabric, glittering metalwork, the soft textures of petals and feathers, refined yet extravagant, sensual yet ethereal, intoxicating yet harmonious. Venus is the Roman goddess of beauty and love, counterpart to the Greek Aphrodite. In Rococo paintings, she symbolizes love, eroticism, and idealized female beauty. As with other classical goddesses and similar figures, she is, of course, also an excuse for male artists to paint the naked female body. Artistic depictions of Venus can be seen as products of the male gaze, but with the objectifying and predatory aspects of that gaze obscured by the legitimizing mythological origins of the figure and the manner or style in which it is treated, with elegance, grace, and visual harmony. The visually attractive element in art of this kind was described by contemporary French writers on art in various ways: le genre agréable, amiable, or gracieux. The concept of grâce, grace, was distinguished from beauté, beauty, by its ability to produce a more active response in the viewer. Thus, the painter Michel-François d'André Bardon, in his Treatise on Painting of 1765, wrote that beauty raises us up in contemplation, but it binds us and reduces us to a kind of inaction, which will often leave us bored, whereas grace inflames us, so to speak, agitates and affects us, and it is from these interesting emotions that the pleasures of the imagination are born. Of course, the appeal of Venus as an image in art was not limited to men. Boucher's painting was commissioned by a woman, Madame de Pompadour, and was displayed in her house and presumably enjoyed by her as an aesthetic experience and as a receptacle of meanings that were important to her. Female patrons of art and sitters for high-status portraits might well choose to be depicted as Venus, and as Madame de Pompadour had played the role of that goddess in a ballet staged for the king around the time that this picture was being painted, the association would have been even stronger. In another example, this sculpture of around 1755 by Étienne Maurice Falconet, The Venus of the Doves, is a portrait of Madame de Pompadour as Venus. In the case of Boucher's paintings for the Château de Bellevue, the appeal of Venus as the goddess of beauty to Madame de Pompadour, the royal mistress who held her position because her physical attractions won for her a place in the king's affections, is natural enough. To have Venus depicted bathing and being adorned is not only appropriate to the functions of the room in which the pictures were displayed, Pompadour's main bathing chamber, but also symbolized the interface between the private and the public realms which she inhabited. And not least, the faces of Venus in both paintings seem to be intended as portraits of Madame de Pompadour, although Boucher always found it hard to capture a likeness, one of his few artistic shortcomings. Some scholars of Boucher have disputed that portraiture was the intention here, but there is undoubtedly an echo of Pompadour's own features in the shape of the face, the long straight nose, and rounded, slightly cleft chin. If this was indeed the intention, her identification here with the goddess of love is made even clearer. The painting makes use of a basically triangular composition, an approach typical of many works of art that use a number of figures with a focus upon one in particular, and not just during the Rococo period. Boucher himself uses a similar triangular arrangement in many other works. However, it is more complicated and more interesting than that, with Boucher playing with various alignments and arrangements to create a grouping of figures that is balanced but also dynamic. Well, maybe not dynamic, as the whole scene is so languorous, but mobile. There is a sense that the figures are in motion. The figure of Venus is central to the composition, but with the main mass of her body offset to the viewer's left, so that she is seated with her body facing to the right, but her head turned, and her eyes turned within her head, to look to the left. Her gaze is directed downwards, because, as an overdoor panel, this painting would have been hung relatively high. That angle of her head to the left is echoed by the angle of the nearby Putto's head to the right. The vertical centerline of the canvas passes through her right knee and her open left hand, and, halfway between them, her left breast, just where she is holding that dove of hers, which is also the point at which the horizontal centerline crosses her figure. Thus, despite her asymmetrical positioning and posture, Venus is firmly anchored to the primary axes of the canvas, a way of combining fluid asymmetry with classicizing balance and harmony that is typically Rococo. The eye is led up towards the focus of Venus's head and face by a serpentine curve that takes in Venus's limbs and torso and the bodies of the two putti who attend upon her, a movement that is given further energy and focus by the elements that make up the picture's setting. It is a setting with a theatrical air, with stage and backdrop, and even curtains on either side to manage the extent of the viewer's visual experience of the scene, and it is worth remembering that among Boucher's many artistic talents was the designing of theatrical scenery. The setting partakes of both indoors and outdoors, with a large stone pillar on the left, half concealed behind drapery, marking the transition point. The suggestion is of a terrace of some kind, opening into a garden or open country, signified by the foliage visible in the background. The companion piece to this painting, the Bath of Venus, is set in the country, on the banks of a river within a wooded landscape. The contrast between the two would emphasize this theme of transition. In front of this environment of blues, greys, and greens, the soft, rosy pinks of Venus's body and the bodies of her attendant putti, surrounded by the pink, red, and gold of couch, draperies, and accessories, make a striking contrast, giving the figures extra life against the static and more somberly coloured elements of the background. Venus, freshly bathed, is adorning herself with the help of winged putti, who flutter about bringing jewels and other adornments for her approval. Her white doves, traditional attributes of Venus, are also part of the scene. She holds one to her breast, while the other nestles by her feet. Venus is naked, but not completely exposed. Boucher's art is sensual rather than erotic, but the viewer is invited to relish her delicate pink skin and smoothly rounded limbs, and, as this picture was in Madame de Pompadour's bathroom, she was presumably drawn to identify herself with the rosy perfection of this goddess of love. To the total of 3 putti in the picture we can add a fourth, as the elaborately decorated and richly cushioned divan upon which Venus sits is topped by a carved putto in gilded wood. In the bottom right corner of the painting, thin wisps of smoke escape from the vents of a large bronze or gilt incense burner, contributing some heavy, luxurious scent to the scene. On the lower edge of the picture, picked through by a puto in search of something Venus might like to wear, are strings of pearls in a shell-shaped dish, both pearls and shell making reference to Venus's birth among the waves of the sea. Folds of rich fabric not only bind the elements of the composition together, but appeal further to the viewer's senses, inviting the onlooker to imagine the feel of silk and brocade against bare skin. And at the focal point of the composition, Venus, her hair decorated with pearls by her winged companions, gazes dreamily into the distance. She has had her bath, and soon she will be ready to do, well, not very much, one imagines.